Today, coffee accounts for almost 2 billion cups consumed daily around the world. It's the second most traded commodity on the planet after oil. It's sold in every country, on every inhabited continent. But for roughly 5 centuries, coffee was periodically outlawed. It was banned by the rulers of Mecca. It was banned by Ottoman sultans, under penalty of death. It was banned in Sweden, not once, but at least 5 times. It was nearly banned in Prussia, and in certain Catholic circles in Italy. It was officially investigated as a possible invention of the devil. Today we'll walk through all these bans one by one. Why a drink made from beans that grew quietly in the mountains of Ethiopia suddenly became dangerous enough that drinking it could cost a person their life. The coffee plant originates in the mountainous regions of present-day Ethiopia, where local communities knew its fruit long before the rest of the world had ever heard of coffee. But the drink as we recognize it today, roasted and brewed beans, first spread in Yemen around the 15th century. At first, coffee was drunk almost exclusively by Sufi mystics. It helped them stay awake during long nights of prayer and meditation. From there, the drink quickly moved from religious lodges into the streets of Arabian cities and on to Mecca, Cairo, Damascus, and Istanbul, where the first coffeehouses appeared, the coffeehouses. And this is where the trouble begins. Coffeehouses became places where people gathered, talked, discussed politics, played chess, and listened to music, often late into the night. For many rulers of the time, this looked less like an innocent habit and more like a dangerous, uncontrolled gathering of people. The earliest well-documented ban on coffee took place in Mecca in 1511. A local governor named Khair Beg ordered the city's coffeehouses closed, convening a council of religious jurists to decide whether coffee was permissible under Islam. The arguments against coffee weren't purely religious. Khair Beg was concerned that coffeehouses were becoming gathering places where patrons criticized local authorities, and that coffee itself might produce effects similar to intoxication, which would make it haram under the prohibition on alcohol. Some scholars of the time did issue religious rulings against coffee, and drinking it was briefly banned in the city. However, the ban didn't last long. A higher authority, the Sultan of Cairo, later overturned the ruling and coffee was officially declared permissible. This established a pattern that would repeat over the next 300 years, a local ban, a religious or political dispute, and then a reversal, only for a new wave of bans to appear somewhere else. In the Ottoman Empire, coffee went through several waves of bans during the 16th and 17th centuries, and the most famous is associated with Sultan Murad IV, who reigned from 1623 to 1640. Murad IV banned coffee, along with tobacco and alcohol, as part of a broader campaign against coffeehouses, which he viewed as hotbeds of political conspiracy, rebellion planning, and criticism of his rule, especially following several Janissary uprisings within the empire's elite military corps. This wasn't purely a religious ban. It was, above all, an attempt to control the spaces where public opinion was being formed. According to contemporary accounts and later historians, the penalties for violating Murad IV's decree were extremely harsh. A first offense could result in a beating, and repeat offenses, according to some historical sources, could result in execution. The Sultan himself, according to legend, sometimes walked the streets of Istanbul at night in disguise to check whether his own decrees were being enforced. After Murad IV's death, the ban gradually faded, and coffeehouses reopened. Coffee in the Ottoman Empire ultimately became such an integral part of the culture that the very word coffee in English comes, via the Turkish kahve, from the Arabic kahwa. When coffee reaches Europe in the first half of the 17th century, the reaction follows a familiar pattern. In Venice, one of the first European cities where coffee appeared thanks to trade with the East, some clergy called it an invention of the Muslims, and voiced suspicion toward the strange new foreign drink. According to a widely repeated legend, the question of coffee even reached Pope Clement VIII around 1600. He was reportedly urged to ban the satanic drink of the infidels. But, as the story goes, the Pope tasted the coffee first and, contrary to his advisor's expectations, liked it so much that he jokingly baptized it, making it acceptable for Christians. This story should be told with caution. There are few primary documentary sources for this exact episode, and serious historians treat the details with some skepticism, although the fact that there was real controversy over coffee's status in Catholic Europe at the time is well documented. In England, things unfolded differently, and more dramatically. By the 1670s, London had hundreds of coffeehouses, which had become centers of political discussion, the spread of news, and even the early roots of journalism and financial exchanges. It was at Lloyd's Coffee House that the famous insurance company Lloyd's of London would eventually emerge. It was precisely this political function of coffeehouses that alarmed King Charles II. In December 1675, he issued a royal proclamation ordering the closure of all coffeehouses in England, accusing them of spreading false, malicious, and scandalous reports, and of becoming dangerous breeding grounds for criticism of the government. The backlash was so fierce, from merchants who depended on coffeehouses for business to the patrons themselves, that the government was forced to rescind the order in less than a week before it had even taken effect. This is one of the fastest official reversals of a coffee ban in history, and it shows just how deeply coffeehouses had already become woven into London's economic and social life in only a few decades. If there's a champion among nations for the sheer number of attempts to ban coffee, it's undoubtedly Sweden. Between 1756 and 1817, Swedish authorities imposed bans or strict restrictions on coffee at least 5 times. The reasons were largely economic and political. The ruling class worried about money flowing out of the country to pay for imported coffee, and, once again the same pattern, about coffeehouses as venues for political talk and potential defiance of authority. In 1756, heavy taxes were imposed on coffee and coffee equipment. In 1766 and 1794, outright bans on coffee consumption were introduced. The most famous episode involves King Gustav III, who, near the end of the 18th century, ordered a peculiar experiment. A pair of twins sentenced to death were pardoned on the condition that one of them drink large quantities of coffee every day for the rest of his life, while the other drank tea, in order to prove which of the 2 drinks was more deadly. According to the popular version of the legend, the tea drinker died first, at the age of 83, while the coffee drinker outlived him, and outlived King Gustav III himself. This story should be told explicitly as a popular legend. No reliable contemporary medical records of this experiment survive, although the fact that Swedish authorities at the very highest level regarded coffee as a matter of state concern is well documented. The last in the series of Swedish bans was finally repealed in 1822. Today, that same Sweden is one of the countries with the highest per capita coffee consumption in the world. In Prussia, in 1777, King Frederick the Great issued a decree restricting the sale and roasting of coffee, explicitly encouraging the population to drink beer instead, including the traditional beer soup for breakfast. His motivation was largely economic. Coffee was an imported good that drained significant amounts of silver abroad, while beer was made from local barley and supported the domestic economy. The decree allowed only licensed state roasters to roast coffee, and ordinary people were forbidden from doing it themselves at home. Violators could be fined, and special inspectors known as coffee sniffers, Kaffeeriker, literally patrolled the streets, sniffing for the smell of illegally roasted coffee coming from people's windows. Despite all these measures, demand for coffee in Prussia never disappeared, and Frederick's decree eventually lost its force, another example of how none of history's coffee bans could, in the long run, defeat a habit that had already taken root among the population. If you look at all these episodes together, a very clear pattern emerges. Almost none of history's coffee bans were really about the drink itself, about its taste, its aroma, or even religious rules as such. Almost always, it was about the coffeehouses, the spaces where people gathered, talked, and thought together, outside the control of those in power. Coffee became a convenient target again and again precisely because social life formed around it that rulers, from the governor of Mecca to the king of Sweden, could never fully control. And again, these bans failed, not because the authorities didn't try hard enough, but because a habit that had already taken root in the daily lives of millions of people proved stronger than any decree. Today, not a single country on the planet bans coffee. The same drink that could once have earned a person a beating in Istanbul or a fine in Prussia is now sold on nearly every street corner of nearly every city in the world. The coffee you might be drinking right now passed through centuries of decrees, fines, religious disputes, and even death sentences, and survived all of it simply because people really, really liked it. Most people pour themselves a cup of coffee every morning without ever thinking that this same drink was once officially considered a threat to the state in 5 different countries on 3 continents. Now you know the story. If this video changed the way you'll look at your next cup of coffee, hit like. It's the best way to help this channel reach more people. And let us know in the comments, what other everyday thing from your daily life do you think was once banned somewhere?